Welcome, beautiful people, to Camp Koji. My name is Joel. Thank you for joining me as I break down the biggest gaming news from the week that was on the only podcast you will ever need. On today's show, we're going to talk about Black Myth Wukong. We got another update for the Xbox version and Concord getting shut down. But I want to start by talking about Mr. Astro Bot. So this game came out last week. I was able to get my hands on it and give it a try. But before I go into what I thought about the game, I want to look at the Metacritic. So right now the Metacritic is sitting at a pretty damn good 94, and the user score on Metacritic is 9.6. It is, I believe this makes it the highest rated game on Metacritic. Let me check on OpenCritic. OpenCritic is currently 95, 100% critics recommend. And yeah, I believe this makes it the highest rated game of 2024 so far. And I think in second place right now is Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, and or it's probably Elden Ring. I think might be the other one that's a little bit. I think that rounds out the top three. I think it's Astro Bot, Shadow of the Erd Tree, and Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Yeah, so obviously really, really great reviews. This is one of those games where the moment they announced and they showed it, I felt pretty confident that I was going to do really well, just simply because of Astro's Playroom. So Astro's Playroom was included with every PlayStation 5. It is a pretty good showcase for what the DualSense is capable of. But on top of that, it just honestly was a really fun and inventive and creative platformer. Very, very short. You know, I believe there are only there are 4 worlds, and each world is cut into, I think, it's 4 sub levels or something like that. And I went back into it before Astro Bot came out because there are 4 special bots that you can rescue, and then those 4 special bots show up in Astro Bot when you buy it and you fire it up. So, but then when I went back, for some reason, my PlayStation mysteriously deleted my Astro Bot save file. I don't understand exactly what happened, but for whatever reason, my save file was just deleted. So I had to replay through the levels in order to sort of unlock the ability to start unlocking those 4 bots. But it was, it's not like, it wasn't like torture, right? It was like, okay, cool. I get to replay this really fun game that I remember playing when I first fired up my PlayStation 5 years ago. And yeah, I think this is one of those games where I knew it was going to do really well, but a 94 is still pretty damn good. Yeah, so I was able to play it. I was able to get the platinum. Yeah, I mean, everything that everyone is saying about the game is pretty spot on. It really is just kind of fun from beginning to end. The game does a really good job of, I think, always finding a way to make every single thing in the game interactive. I think that's one of the biggest accomplishments that this game has. You know, a lot of people talk about how it's sort of a physics playground where there's always things to punch, whether it's leaves or little gems, and you always feel compelled to play in them. It really does feel like the video game version of kicking through a pile of leaves. You know what I'm saying? And even just other things where it's when you not finish each level, but once you finish each world, you get a different part for your ship in order to sort of rebuild the ship that you landed with or crash landed with. And even those moments where you get those parts, you have to collect the CPU, the fan, I think the motherboard is another one, the GPU. And before you install it, you have to actually there's these different mechanics of trying to clean it and repair it in order to reinstall it. And all those are sort of interactive. One of my favorites was there's a fan, and you have to pour liquid cooling into it. So you have to actually tilt your controller and pour this what looks like water into the box. And yeah, it does a really good job of sort of never letting you put the controller down. It almost feels infinitely interactive. It takes very good advantage of everything that the DualSense is able to do, especially the speaker. It uses that really, really well. Walking on different surfaces, sort of the instant change in the sound. Sometimes it's really, really subtle, but same thing goes with the vibration. One of my favorite mechanics was there are these special walls that sort of glow green. You have to like drag Astro's hand over it, and there's like these tiles. Maybe it's like 8 tiles, and eventually one of the tiles is going to just feel different in your hand because of the DualSense vibration, the feedback. And that's the one that's like a secret switch you have to push in order to advance. So it has a lot of these tricks where the game almost like dares you to be bored in a sense, It's very inventive, it's very creative. You can definitely tell that it's heavily, and I mean heavily, influenced by Super Mario. But it's like, I mean, let's be honest, what 3D platformer isn't influenced by Super Mario? But yeah, the influences are very well written, sort of all over the game. Yeah, just an absolutely really fun, good game. My only gripes with it would be I do wish it was a little bit more challenging. There are these challenge levels that are based upon the PlayStation shapes, so square, triangle, circle, as PlayStation officially calls it, cross, but we all know it's the X button. And each of those is split into like these 4 sub levels, and those are like the most challenging levels. And then the very last level of the game is sort of supposed to be the most challenging one. I actually wish they were a little bit more challenging, like they were a good challenge. I'm not going to sit here and act like I finished each of them on my first try. But yeah, there was a part of me that wished they were a little bit more challenging. But Asobi has confirmed that they are adding some post-launch DLC, and part of that DLC is going to be new challenge levels and a speedrun mode. And a fan on Reddit did notice that there were several references in the game's credits that include characters that are currently not in the game. So Worms, Stellar Blade, Rise of the Ronin, Rayman, Beyond Good and Evil, Assassin's Creed, Croc, Legend of the Gobos. Those are all games that are included in the credits, but none of these are actually any of the bots that are included in the video game, which is pretty cool. Like my guess is like inside the game, there are some levels where for franchises, they have like multiple bots that you can find from a single franchise in a singular level. So I'm guessing like maybe one of the challenge levels might be sort of Ubisoft themed, and that's where you'll find Rayman, the girl from Beyond Good and Evil. I don't remember her name. And I'm gonna guess is maybe modeled after Altair for Assassin's Creed. Yeah, I mean the references are cool. A lot of them, are pretty nostalgia inducing. Like one of my favorites was Devil Dice. Devil Dice is a game that I hold very near and dear to my heart because when I had the original PlayStation, my family did not really have the type of budget to be consistently buying games. So I would probably get like one game a year for PlayStation, or maybe stuff out of like the bargain bin. So like a lot of kids my age, I really relied a lot on demo discs. And I remember Devil Dice being on the demo disc, and I basically, beat the brakes off of that demo until the CD didn't even work anymore. So being able to see sort of a little of a tribute to that game inside of this one was really, really cool to see. My hope is that after this one, Astro Bot can sort of stand up on his own. Astro's Playroom was really an homage to PlayStation being able to go through their entire hardware history. This one was more focused on PlayStation IP, especially a lot of third party. The only one that I found mysteriously missing was Square Enix, that one was kind of weird. There were no references to Final Fantasy, Cloud, or anything like that. My guess is it's either has to be DLC, or for whatever reason Square Enix didn't want to license it, which is weird because there were references to Final Fantasy in Astro's Playroom, so it's kind of weird that it was missing here, and that's definitely one of the key PlayStation titles. That was definitely one where I was like, okay, that's kind of weird that was missing. But there's so many like obscure ones, like Intelligent Cube, for example, has its own Astro Bot. So I'm kind of curious as to what happened there. But yeah, this game is the real deal. A lot of people are comparing it to Super Mario Odyssey. Personally, I mean, if someone had to make me choose, I probably would still go with Super Mario Odyssey. I think the one gripe that I have with Astro Bot would be a lot of the mechanics are very, very inventive. A lot of the, different sort of suits that you wear, the monkey, the mouse, the bulldog, all these different ones they have. They have one level that was weird because that mechanic only happened in one level where Astrobot sort of turns into a sponge and you can soak up water. I was like, okay, this is actually a really, really inventive thing that they added here. But it was weird because it only existed in a single level. Stuff like that was really, really inventive. But the enemies are just instantly forgettable. It was one thing that I noticed when I was playing Astro's Playroom, which is like, oh, these enemies are like really, really, honestly, borderline boring. The enemies are. They're definitely a lot more inventive in this one. The boss battles were really, really cool. I think that was one of the things that blew me away about the game was that there were a lot of these levels that you would play and then all of a sudden a boss would show up. And it's almost kind of rare to see a game that would go through all the trouble to build out a boss battle and then it only be used one time, or like it used in such a short sequence where it just really feels like a much bigger enemy at the end of a level. That I found really, really interesting. So there's definitely a lot of variety. There's a lot of those moments where you think that the what do you call it? The level's about to be over, and all of a sudden a boss shows up, or there's a lot of circumventing of expectations, which I really, really liked. It's a really fun game. Everything that everybody's saying is very, very true about it. This game will, without a doubt, be nominated for Game of the Year. There's zero doubt about it. Does it have an opportunity to win? Absolutely. I think Astro Bot definitely has a chance to win right now. I think the front runners for Game of the Year right now, currently, are probably Astro Bot and Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. I think the advantage with this game has is recency bias. I think that's a legitimate thing when it comes to voting at Game of the Year. I think Black Myth will get a nod also. It'll be interesting to see how everything else is rounding out. Space Marine 2 is it looks like a game that might be shaping up to earn a nomination, but we'll have to see. It'll be interesting to see what does Zelda. What's the name of the official name of that game? Echoes something. That comes out, I think, later this month. It'll be interesting to see how well that game does. That might get a nomination. But this game, without a doubt, will absolutely earn a nomination. And, it definitely does have a chance to win. So PlayStation's almost borderline streak of having a Game of the Year nomination, I think, is absolutely going to continue this year. This is going to be the 10th anniversary of the Game Awards in December. And I think PlayStation has only missed one Game of the Year nomination. So 9 out of 10 is definitely not a bad record at all. Next story, I want to quickly give sort of a Black Myth Wukong update. So last week we talked about this controversy about Black Myth Wukong where, early on, the developers at GameSign said, hey, this game's not coming to Xbox because we need more time to optimize it. Jess Corden from Windows Central reached out to Xbox. Asking for a statement. Xbox sort of said, hey, we don't comment on deals that our partners make. So there was sort of this underlying rumor that, hey, maybe Sony actually did strike a deal. Then last week we spoke about IGN and Forbes both publishing articles that claim that they had knowledge from an inside source that there is no technical issue. There is no technical reason why this game isn't on Xbox. There actually was a deal made with PlayStation for this game not to be released on Xbox at launch. And it looks like Microsoft released a bit of an update. So they responded to Forbes. Forbes requested comment on their story. Microsoft finally got back to them. And this was their exact quote. It says, "As we have said before, we're excited for the launch of Black Myth Wukong on Xbox Series X and S and are working with Game Science to bring the game to our platforms. We'd prefer not to comment on the deals made by our partners with other platform holders, but we can confirm that the delay is not due to Xbox platform limitations that have been raised to us." I personally feel it doesn't get clearer than that. I see some people online who are still sort of holding on to this notion of, well, if this really was truly a deal, then PlayStation would be parading it. They would be talking about it. They would be pushing the game. And for them, that is proof enough that there is no deal in place. But the issue is that in this moment, Xbox has absolutely no reason to lie. And when a statement like this goes out, it's not like one single individual making this statement. Multiple eyes usually go on these types of statements because as a company, when you have your internal marketing and PR, that when you, especially for a website like Forbes, that when you give that statement, it's going to go public. It's not a statement that is just going to go to that journalist and the journalist is going to absorb it, take it, and then just move on with their day. That this is, whatever you say is now going to be public. So it's not like this is just one person at Microsoft that's putting out this statement. This statement is drafted and then it's seen by more than one person. There is pretty much no reason for Xbox to fabricate this. There's no reason for Xbox to lie about this. And I think that it was very smart for them to, in a sense, defend themselves by saying, yeah, this is not due to platform limitations. I mean, it's no secret that we have all collectively sort of accepted at this point that the Xbox Series S has sort of been holding Xbox back for a bit. It's no surprise, like a lot of developers have talked about, that it is not fun to optimize their games for the Xbox Series S. There have been public issues before. We know, especially with Baldur's Gate 3, that was the prime reason why that game missed its launch on Xbox, was because split screen was like an important feature and they weren't able to get it done. Historically, we know that Halo Infinite was not able to get split screen working, and one of the big rumors was it was because of the Xbox Series S and the fact that Microsoft requires parity via both versions. So a lot of people say the Xbox Series S is a mistake. I don't think so. I think the mistake was forcing complete parity with both versions and not allowing companies to remove certain features from the Xbox Series S version if they needed to in order for a game to make a launch. And it's smart for Xbox to do this because that's essentially what's been happening. The moment that this game missed and Game Science was saying, hey, we have to optimize the game further, everyone's mind instantly went to, well, it has to be because of the Xbox Series S. So it makes sense for Xbox to defend themselves. And at the same time, like I said, there's no reason for them to include that sentence of, we prefer not to comment on deals made by our partners unless they are aware of something happening. And I've also seen some people online saying like, oh, well, if there was a deal, Xbox wouldn't be aware of it. That's not necessarily true at all. They would be made aware of it. So yeah, this is a really, really weird subject, but one that I personally feel like we can kind of put to bed. There's obviously was something that happened between PlayStation and Game Science. I think if you're a Game Science and there was no truth to this, you would have already come forward and said, hey, there is no truth to this. We are optimizing the game. But I think at this point, the ball is sort of back in Game Science's court to put out a statement to deny this, because it doesn't look like they're going to confirm this. But at this point, it does look very likely that for whatever reason, Game Science just lied when they said, yeah, we have to further optimize this game. Now, it sort of sounds like what Forbes is saying was that PlayStation helped them finish this game. I guess they funded this game in some sort of way in order for them to be able to finish it. And that in turn led into some sort of, maybe even if it was a minor exclusivity window for PlayStation, but for whatever reason, PlayStation did not want to publicize it. It's very, very weird. A lot of people are saying, can they do this? I think that this is only a stink if Xbox decides to make it a stink and bring it up to, places like the Federal Trade Commission or something like that. In terms of it being, I think it is sort of creates a little bit of an unfair market advantage where you're not making it very clear to your consumers that there has been some sort of deal put in place with a company for a certain game to not come to another console. I think we'd all be able to agree that that is a bit unfair. But yeah, in other news, Black Myth Wukong has surpassed 18 million copies sold in just 2 weeks, which is nothing short of phenomenal. I mean, absolutely, this game I think will get nominated for Game of the Year. I think it does earn that Game of the Year nomination. I think people are even though it's sold that much, I think people are still downplaying how important this game is. I think a lot of people forget that China and video games, that's not the most common sentence to hear because games have been banned in China for such a long, long time. So for a developer from China to create a game that had this much of an impact in the West and it be something that has brought up so much national pride over there in China, I think is nothing short of incredible. And I think it's a game that, especially when we think about the Game Awards, they would absolutely want to be nominated because, who doesn't want China tuning in to watch the Game Awards to see if this game wins Game of the Year? Damn, imagine the views for Game Awards this year when this game gets nominated. I think there's zero doubt that this game gets, at the very least, a nomination for Game of the Year. Do I think it's going to win? No. I do not think the game should win, and I don't think it will win. And usually when I talk about Game of the Year, I always look at it from an objective perspective. I rarely ever look at it subjectively. I think I always have my personal Game of the Year, but then I always at the same time say yeah, I think this is going to be the Game of the Year. Like Elden Ring was like an easy call, right? That game was going to win Game of the Year. Last year was an easy call that Baldur's Gate was going to sweep. This year is a little bit tougher. I think it's we'll have to wait and see until November when nominations are called in order for me to decide which game I think is going to win Game of the Year. But this game I do not see winning. I do not see it winning over Final Fantasy VII, nor do I see it actually winning over Astro Bot. Once again, looking at things very, very objectively, I don't think that's going to happen here. Our final story is all about Concord. So, in what I would call a fairly unprecedented move, Sony completely shut down Concord just 2 weeks after its release. Now, I think the last game that's close to, I guess, being this much of a failure was maybe Sega's Hyenas, which was a game that was shut down before it even released. But I think that I think what makes this an even bigger failure was the fact that this is PlayStation. And man, like so much about this went wrong that I want to get into. But the director of the game, Ryan Ellis, said the following on a PlayStation blog post. He says, quote, Concord fans, we've been listening closely to your feedback since the launch of Concord on PlayStation 5 and PC. I want to thank everyone who has joined the journey aboard the North Star. Your support and the passionate community that has grown around the game has meant the world to us. However, while many qualities of the experience resonated with players, we also recognize that other aspects of the game in our initial launch didn't land the way we'd intended. Therefore, at this time, we had decided to take the game offline beginning September 6, 2024, and explore options, including those that will better reach our players. While we determine the best path ahead, Concord sales will cease immediately, and we will begin to offer a full refund for all gamers who have purchased the game for PlayStation 5 or PC. Yeah, this is pretty insane. So it shutting off on September 6th means that it shut down pretty much exactly 2 weeks after its initial launch. I guess a little over 2 weeks if you count early access, I guess. This is insane because it means that PlayStation did the math and they decided it would be cheaper to shut down the game rather than keep it running and simultaneously find a way to fix it, right? Think about earlier, what was it, early this year it came out or late last year, I don't remember, when Foam Stars came out. So Foam Stars came out, it went on PlayStation Plus month 1 or day 1, and very instantly was forgotten. This October, the game is going free to play, which means that Square Enix figured that, you know what, no one's really playing this. I think we have to turn it free to play. But even through all of that, the game remained, right? For this game, even if they decided like, okay, Concord must go free to play, the player count was so low that they realized that it would cost more to keep the servers running rather than shutting the game down and offering a refund to absolutely everyone. And think about it like this. If you bought this digital, the refund is instant, right? That is money that PlayStation already understands that the moment they made this decision, every single digital copy, whether it was PlayStation 5, whether it was PC on Steam, you're instantly giving that money back because those refunds are going to be automatic. It's not going to be something that someone even has to request it. For physical copies, it's a little bit different, right? At that point now, you have to work with your partners. You have to work with your Best Buys, your Targets, your GameStops, and basically tell them, hey, we need a special request for refunds. If someone comes back, even if the game is open, just take it and we'll refund you the money if you send us the disc. Or they're probably going to tell these GameStops and Best Buys, just destroy the disc and we're going to, refund the money for it. So, Best Buy and Targets and stuff are not losing money taking back these refunds. That's a lot. It's funny because I say like that's a lot of money lost, but maybe it wasn't that much because they probably didn't sell that much. IGN had talked about, and we discussed this last week, that an analyst believes that Sony only sold 25,000 copies of this game. This is definitely, I don't think it's, I tried to think about it, and I think PlayStation has had a lot of failures, just like any company. They've had a lot of failures. They've had a lot of ups and downs. But this is without a doubt their biggest failure. And nothing really comes close. When you think about PlayStation as a brand, this is so far away from something that would be capable at PlayStation. It's almost hard to even fathom and understand. Where I've said this before, where I believe that if you showed anyone this trailer and you removed all the logos, I don't think anyone would guess that PlayStation was publishing this game. It's just it felt so out of PlayStation's wheelhouse. And I think it is very indicative of PlayStation eyes being bigger than their stomachs for a live service. And it really smelled, it had this stench of desperation when it comes to PlayStation's desire for live service. This pivot that they've been making towards trying to create this sector for their gaming division has been nothing short of desperate from PlayStation. It's very un-PlayStation-like that I've been talking about for quite some time when it comes to their approach to live service. So let's go through a couple of... Actually, no, before I go, because I want to talk about Sony's live service future and what does Concord's failure mean for that live service future. But before I go into that, I just want to just make sure I write this in concrete and clarify something here. The reason why Concord failed is really, really simple. Please do not think that Concord failed because the game was woke. You know, like I see a couple of like people on Twitter saying this. That's not what happened here. The game did not fail because it had really butch women and or because they had pronouns listed for each of these characters. So it's not why this game failed. It's actually very, very simple why this game failed. It's very easy to see. I said at the moment that this game was shown that this game was not going to do well. A lot of us, I'm not trying to say I'm the smartest person in the room. It was a pretty obvious thing when you first saw this game. You knew that it was not going to do very well. Few things. Number one, the game was officially announced and shown just 3 months before it launched. That's strike number one. That sometimes can work, right? Sometimes a lot of people forget that Apex Legends was a surprise launch. No one even knew Apex Legends existed until EA decided to release it. So it's not like it's completely unprecedented. Hi-Fi Rush, another great example of a game that no one even heard of, and boom, all of a sudden they dropped it, everyone played it, and they loved it. So sometimes short marketing windows are not like the worst idea, right? We've seen Nintendo, I think it was Super Mario Brothers Wonder, they announced like 6 months before release. Nintendo has been doing that a little bit lately with their announced games, and within a 6-month window they release it. So it's not super unprecedented to have a short marketing window. But I think for this game, it was a mistake because they didn't give the game enough time. They didn't give fans enough time to really understand what the game was. And most importantly, when you have a hero shooter, I think the most important thing is to be able to really build out each of these heroes in order to... I think the goal is that before a game comes out, you get fans excited to play with certain people, whether it's one or multiple heroes. That's why I love to use the example of Overwatch. When I first saw that Overwatch cinematic, I think everyone felt the same way, which is like you instantly latched on, whether it was Reaper, whether it was Hanzo, Genji, you instantly latched on to a character. You're like, oh my God, I want to play as that character. Their weapon, their outfit, their kit looks really, really cool. For this game, it was weird because when they first showed it, they only showed 5 characters. And we really didn't learn about any of the other gunners that they had in the game until the beta really began, right? And then that was strike number one. Strike number one was lack of marketing, right? Showcased the game 3 months before, and even leading up to it, it just sort of looked like PlayStation was not giving this team, the marketing team, a big budget for this game, right? Strike number 2 was the fact that this game looked like it should have released 4 years ago or something like that, right? The issue with chasing trends, and we see this a lot with a lot of different companies, is that it's almost like when you see something popular and you say to yourself, wow, that looks really cool. So Overwatch is a great example. Like, wow, this is actually a really cool idea, having hero shooters or having heroes and different abilities, and it'd be multiplayer and people working together, 5v5, 6v6, or whatever it is. That looks like a really great idea. The problem is that when you start building that game, you have the same idea as 20 other people, right? That's what happened like the Battle Royale genre, where when you think about the success of a game like Fortnite and even a success like a game like Apex Legends, they really struck when the iron was burning hot, right? Concord came out definitely like 4 years too late. Let's be honest. I think people are sort of over hero shooters. And I've said this before, any shooter that is introduced into the world right now, not only do you need an interesting mechanic, but you almost need perfect weather conditions in order to even succeed. So when you look at a game like Spectre Divide is a great example, where Spectre Divide had a lot of good things going for it. Number one, it's a tactical shooter. So I don't think that is like overtly saturated right now. But, you know, you do kind of lose the demographic of the casual crowd. Casual gamers do not want to play tactical shooters. They're not into them because they're so heavily aim-based and skill-based. So that's an advantage it had. And number two, it had a really cool mechanic. You know, you're able to split a character in two. Really, really cool mechanic that I'm not going to say it's never been done in a game before, but I personally can't remember the last time I ever saw it. But it released, and no one's talking about this game. I don't know. I haven't looked at the... Let me see. I'm typing it in right now. The Steam DB on it. Let's see their chart. 30,000 was their peak. 22,000 was their 24-hour peak. There's 11,230 players right now. When it first launched... right now, the reviews are mixed, 57%. That's actually only 57% are positive. That's really, really bad. And apparently, a lot of the negative reviews was because of the pricing. There was apparently like a weapon kit that was like $70, which is like batshit insanity. And then you looked at the weapons, it's like the most basic bitch type of like designs you've ever seen. I don't know what these developers were smoking when they thought that was a good idea. I've said this before, which is that when you create a free-to-play game, I don't care if you're an indie, if you don't set up what I refer to as a proper burn rate for like the first 3 to 6 months for your video game, meaning that within those first 3 to 6 months you're giving before you're asking, then you're gonna fail. If you make a game, even if it's free to play, and you're asking people for $70 for a bunch of skins, when that's the price of a premium video game nowadays, you're just going to fail immediately because consumers are just going to look at it as like, well, this is just greedy. You're just asking for way too much now. You know, you're not Ubisoft, you're not EA, you're not this huge publisher. Like, what is this? You're asking for $70. You know, I think a lot of people understand that you have to keep the lights on, but that doesn't feel like a price where you have to keep the lights on. That's like you want a jacuzzi in the office. And what I'm saying, I'm saying that from the perspective of a consumer. That's the way that they're going to look at it. So when you look at a game like Spectre Divide, you had these two great things, or even three. The game had a really interesting art design, right? So you have a lot of these cool things that were going for it. And it looks like a game that even right now, I look at it and I go like, I just don't see how this game can find a path to success at this moment in time. And that's mostly because it just released in like the worst time, like literally like the worst time right now to release. I think a multiplayer shooter is right now, especially because of Valve's deadlock. It's super weird to see a game that's not even out, and it's in a completely different genre, but it is still taking away so much attention from anyone that wants to create a shooter at this moment in time. The game has 108,000 people playing it right now. Its all-time peak was 7 days ago, 171,000. Its last 24-hour peak, 163,000 players. The game is not live yet. You know, it's these are insane numbers for a game that is essentially still in alpha, right? And you have a person like Shroud, who is like the key FPS, competitive player that apparently helped build Spectre Divide, and this guy is playing absolutely nothing but Deadlock, which makes sense, right? Unless this company is paying him to play Spectre Divide, it makes sense why he's going to play a game that he'd rather prefer to play. But when you see stuff like that, and this is the guy that showed up in all your marketing talking about, I helped play this game, Spectre Divide, this is the game that I've always wanted, and this is the words from Shroud, these are the games I always wanted to play. You know, the game's going to fail. Sorry, I'm going on a tangent here. But yeah, so it starts off with this game failed because really poor marketing, very short marketing window. It was a hero shooter, which is already saturated. There was nothing unique about this game. Number three, of course, are the hero designs. Like that was, in my opinion, the most important reason as to why Concord failed. The hero designs are without a doubt. There's zero doubt. They're some of the worst character designs I've ever seen. And I try to say that in the most respectful way possible. But it was something that I looked at and I was like, this is so un-PlayStation like. It's just weird that someone at PlayStation didn't step in and say, guys, drawing board, we need to go back. These designs are awful, absolutely awful. We need to go back. Here's more money. Go find yourself a new head artist or whatever you need to do. We need to take this back to the drawing board. So let's not rebuild these characters. Let's not rebuild kits. But these character designs are absolutely awful. Like, we can't release a game like this. I'm surprised that PlayStation didn't do that. Like I said, it's so un-PlayStation-like to release the game in that state in terms of those characters looking that way. And yeah, that was essentially it. The game itself is not a problem. When you play the game, mechanically, it was actually really, really good. From a technical perspective, it really works. I think the modes really sucked. I think they needed to take actually more inspiration from Overwatch for some of their modes. But I think as a shooter, I think it actually worked really, really well. Some other people are saying that the $40 price point was the problem. No, it wasn't. Helldivers 2 peaked at 400,000 players, and it sold for $40. Like that's not the problem here. The $40 price point was not the issue. I think what I just talked about was the issue as to why this game absolutely failed. So how does this affect Sony's live service future? So let's go through a little bit of history. In May 2023, Sony said beyond fiscal year 25, they expect their portfolio to be made up of 60% live service and 40% traditional games. And then back in June 2023, Nikkei reported that Sony's live service R&D spending was around $2.17 billion. So PlayStation was definitely putting a lot of money into this. They believed in it. They felt like this was something that was worth their investment because they were going to see a healthy return on what they were putting in. But this is why I'm saying that I think that their eyes were sort of bigger than their stomach. So it's been a pretty rough start for PlayStation. So let's go with some of the issues they ran into sort of within the last few months. So number one was The Last of Us Factions multiplayer was canceled December 2023. So that's a lot of money that is basically going down the drain. At that point, you can think about all the R&D, all the money that you have to invest in order for this game to be built. Just for Naughty Dog to come forward and say like, yeah, I don't think this makes any sense for us at this point. We would have to spend too much of our resources in order to keep this game running. This was a massive mistake from PlayStation. To this day, I do not understand why they made this decision. This is one of those things where even if Naughty Dog is saying, hey, we don't want to go down this path as a company. We want to ensure that we're able to continue doing single player. We don't want to be handcuffed to doing a live service game. And understand that live service is a consistent investment, right? This is something where it's not like a single player game where you're able to make it once and then there's minor maintenance after that, just bug fixes and stuff like that, making sure it's properly running, and then you could just kind of keep selling the game for years to come. Live service is something that you are consistently having to not only just fund it from within, but you have to now go outside and get a lot of contractors in order to keep up with the amount of skins and cosmetics that you have to make in order for something live service to actually make sense. But the thing about it is that when you look at PlayStation's multiplayer history, it's not very, very deep, right? PlayStation has always historically been known for single player. And yes, they sometimes have a few multiplayer games. The Uncharted multiplayer was kind of fun, right? SOCOM, MAG is another one that a lot of people bring up, right? Killzone. But for the most part, they've never really been known as a company for multiplayer. When you think about multiplayer, the company that you really, really think about first is Xbox, right? So, but what's interesting about that statement is that Last of Us Factions multiplayer has sort of been this outlier. It's essentially turned into a cult classic for PlayStation. It's a multiplayer mode that fans still talk about, and honestly, some still play to this day. So there's something there, right? There's something absolutely there. So even if Naughty Dog said, hey, we don't want to maintain this, the fact that PlayStation didn't try to build a second team in order to maintain it, or move this game over into another developer and have Naughty Dog oversee it, is kind of mind-blowing to me that they just decided to flush all that work down the toilet. I kind of don't get it. I don't understand it. Honestly, I just don't understand why they did it. I guess we'll never know unless someone from the inside really delves into the reasoning exactly why they decided it wasn't going to work. But yeah, so that was one failure. In February 2024, Bloomberg reported that among Sony's 900 employee layoffs, a live service Twisted Metal that was in really early development over at Firesprite, which is the team behind Concord, was canceled. So that just didn't see the light of day. Personally, I'm going to be honest, I don't think it would have actually worked. On one hand, it's very, very unique. But I think Twisted Metal in the form that we all know, I don't think would have actually worked. You know what I think would have worked is if they tried to create, and just stick with me now because this is going to sound kind of crazy, a car driving shooter. So the way that Twisted Metal has always worked is it was driving with weapons. I always looked at it as like a mature version of Mario Kart's balloon game. If anyone remembers Mario Kart, when you played the balloon game, it was an enclosed arena, and you're walking around using weapons and you try to pop balloons. That's always kind of been what sort of the Twisted Metal formula was, but obviously it was very mature with mature weapons and themes. And I think number one, you sort of cut your demographic if you make it mature. So I don't think that if they did a live service Twisted Metal, it would have been mature anymore. I think they would have pushed the envelope, or not, I guess not push the envelope, but I guess lower the envelope, ease off the pedal, and actually would have made this teen. I don't think a mature version of a live service Twisted Metal exists. I don't think PlayStation would have done it personally. I think that it would have been a step a little bit too far. For Last of Us Factions, it makes sense because that's a shooter. That's already a mature crowd. When you talk about driving, like think about Destruction All-Stars, right? That was the game that a lot of people felt that should have been a Twisted Metal. I think that Sony was concerned about a driving game and wanting to open it up for potential sales. But I think that if you turn this game almost into a shooter with cars, I think it would have been interesting. And my idea is very close to the way that the Batmobile worked in Arkham City, whereas like you could drive around with the Batmobile, but then you could hold the left trigger and sort of turn it into a tank, and it almost turned into like a shooter at that point. Something like that I think would have worked a little bit for something like Twisted Metal to make it live service. But, you know, we'll never know. February 2024 was the month that saw Sony's greatest live service accomplishment, Helldivers 2. So on February 19th, the game hit an all-time peak of 458,709 players. It has lost over 90% of its daily active Steam users. Its last peak, as of this recording, was a little over 22,000 players. PlayStation's big mess up was in May 2024, because that was the whole PSN requirement fiasco. For those that don't remember, when the game first launched, it was always supposed to be you needed a PlayStation Network account to play the game. But so many people were trying to play the game that the servers were so messed up that the developers at Arrowhead decided, and I guess they went to Sony. Sony agreed that they needed to remove the PSN requirement in order to just deal with the server issues. So they dealt with the server issues. In May, they decided, hey, we have to bring the requirement back. Huge mistake. A bunch of people were upset. Sony then said, oh, we're taking the requirement out. But what they did at the same time was they removed the game from like over 90 regions that don't have PSN. Huge mistake. And that was the month that they suffered a 219,000 daily player loss. That is a 63% loss. I don't get it. I don't understand it. Only PlayStation will be able to give us the answer as to why they did something that was so absolutely dumb. I mean, maybe we don't see it because we're looking at it from the outside, but there's no part of this decision that makes any sense at all. I said this before, where the solution to this would have been actually very, very simple, which is you should have incentivized people to connect their PlayStation Network. So you should have kept Helldivers 2, you don't need the requirement, but if you connect your PlayStation Network account, you get this free armor and weapon set that is modeled after Kratos or modeled after Jin from Ghost of Tsushima, some special Ghost of Tsushima themed Helldivers armor. The only way to get this is to connect your PSN account. Who's not going to do that, right? It's a free account. Every single person who's able to do it will absolutely do it to get a cool looking piece of armor that you can only get if you connect to PSN. Now, if you're in a country that for whatever reason does not have PSN, sorry, you're not able to get this piece of armor, but you're still able to play the game. Why Sony didn't do this, I don't know. It seems pretty simple. Now, in March 2024, Deviation Games was shut down before it could even ship its first game. For people that don't remember, this was a studio that was started and then was partially funded by PlayStation. PlayStation did not buy the studio, but they were publishing their first game. Just never happened. We don't really know exactly what the game was supposed to be. Bungie's Destiny is currently experiencing its lowest player count in franchise history, around 32,497 daily Steam players in the last 30 days. So Destiny is at its current historical low. Bungie as a company has begun to crumble over the last few months. We know the story about their layoffs. It looks like Sony is starting to take over the company. So honestly, this might be a net positive for PlayStation more than it is a negative. Spider-Man The Great Web, which is a live service concept that was discovered in the Insomniac League, doesn't appear to be moving forward. We don't know that for a fact. And now, of course, we have Concord's failure. Upcoming live service games, we have the Horizon IP that has been long rumored to be getting a live service entry. 2 years ago, there was early footage leaked of what appeared to be a survival game with sort of Fortnite-looking graphics. Rumors have also stated that an MMO is being created within the Horizon world. We don't exactly know if those are true, but I think that the rumors that something live service Horizon happening, I think those are true. It looks like PlayStation has definitely been pushing forward the Horizon IP. It's prominently featured in the Astro Bot game. It is, sales-wise, Horizon has actually been one of PlayStation's biggest successes over the last few years. We have the Lego Horizon Adventures that's coming out, supposed to come out this year. We don't have an exact date yet, but it looks to be coming out this year. There were rumors of a Horizon Netflix show. I'm not sure if that was canceled. Apparently it was canceled. Not really sure exactly what's happening there. But it looks like PlayStation is definitely wanting this to be a much bigger IP. I think they look at it as a perfect blend of sort of open almost to all ages. It really perfectly hits that 13 to 34 demographic because it is, a game that is appealing to like the PlayStation adult, but its themes are not as mature as God of War, so you can reach as low as the teens in order to get people playing it. And of course, you have Lego Horizon Adventures where you're trying to capture an even younger crowd. So it looks like they're really pushing forward that IP a lot more. And once again, it makes sense. I know that Horizon gets a lot of shit from people. I personally didn't like it, not a fan of it, but the numbers don't lie. Sales-wise, it's one of PlayStation's strongest intellectual properties. What What else do they have? It looks like Bend Studio, the team behind Days Gone, are working on a live service game. They did confirm the next game is an original IP. But earlier this year, Job Listing was looking for a new lead project manager with experience in leadership roles, shipping AAA live service games. So it looks like that's another live service game that they're making. Fair Games. So Fair Games was announced in May 2023. So a lot of people are saying, is Concord going to affect Fair Games? So Fair Games, I feel like on the surface, is suffering from the same problems as Concord, which was PlayStation so desperate to get into live service quickly that they almost essentially, once you really think about it, PlayStation almost in a sense made the same mistake that Xbox has been making for years, right? So PlayStation's biggest strength as a publisher has been creating these third-party publishing deals with companies, working very closely with companies, with teams, and then identifying talent and saying, we want this talent to stay together for a long time, so we're going to buy them, right? So they did that with Sucker Punch. They did that with Insomniac. They did that with Naughty Dog. They did that with Sony Santa Monica. They've done such a great job. They did that with, what's the name of the company? The company that made Returnal. I'm blanking on their name right now. But, when they go out and make these purchases, it's not going in blind. It's not just, hey, we want that company, right? It's always been this moment where PlayStation first gets their fingers in the pie before they make deals. Their Kojima deal, right? The moment that Kojima left Konami, PlayStation was probably the first company that called them. And they were like, we don't care what you're doing. We want in. We'll publish your first game. We'll give you the Decima engine. You won't have to pay for it. We're going to give you a dedicated team to help you build your next game. It was almost like PlayStation struck a first look deal. We just want whatever you're creating next, right? But they only did that because of the partnership that they built with Kojima over the years during his work at Konami, right? So they knew that it wasn't a gamble. They knew that they were investing their money properly, and they've done that so well. Xbox, on the other hand, kind of did the opposite. They didn't have the patience that PlayStation did, where they wanted to foster teams, right? You look at what they did with Bungie, where that was a great example, where it's like they identified a team, they bought Bungie, they brought them in, they brought Halo in. And when you think about it, Halo 2 and Halo 3 were incubated within the guise and the guide of Microsoft. Same could be said about Halo 1. And the game got better, right? Halo got better over the years. We can't say the same about Halo under 343, right? So what did Microsoft do? They went out and they bought teams that maybe created something successful that they thought could do it again, right? So they went out and bought Ninja Theory. They went out and bought Compulsion. They went out and even bought Rare, for example. And for the most part, it took a long time for either A, to get for that investment to sort of pay off, or B, the investment still has yet to pay off, right? So Ninja Theory financially is doing really well because of the studio that they built. But when it comes to the games that they've released after Xbox bought them, they've kind of been a drop of water in the ocean. They really haven't made the same impact. And the same could be said for a lot of Microsoft's purchases, but it's because they did things very differently than PlayStation. They didn't have their fingers in that pie. They didn't really know those companies in and out. They didn't really spend enough time with that talent to identify whether it was going to work or not if they were to bring them into the fold. But what's funny is that when it comes to live service, PlayStation has now committed the same mistake that Xbox did, where they've gone to these teams, fresh teams, new teams, untested teams, right? And have sort of, in a sense, gone into them, bought them sight unseen. Bungie is actually a similar one, where it's like, even though they've had success in the past, PlayStation has never really struck a lot of exclusivity sort of third-party publishing deals with Bungie. So in a sense, it was a little bit going into it kind of sight unseen. And Bungie has gone nothing but downhill after PlayStation bought them. Deviation Games, they went out and they said, hey, we want to publish your next game. These guys didn't even ship a game. When you look at Fire Sprite, they went over, for some reason they saw Concord and thought it was going to be a success. But I think, like I said, it smells of desperation. The fact that PlayStation saw this and not only early on thought it was going to be a success, that was a mistake, right? But then the bigger mistake, I feel, was the fact that last year they bought this studio. So somehow PlayStation thought that this game was going to be so successful that they needed to own this studio. That's insane when we look at it in hindsight, right? Right? It's insanity, right? They don't even own Arrowhead that created this amazing Helldivers 2 game for them, right? And maybe, Arrowhead doesn't want to sell. Maybe that's one of the reasons why. But it's just sort of insane because they're committing now the same mistake that Xbox did. And Haven Studios is another example where it's like, this is a brand new team. They haven't shipped anything yet. They're very unproven. And they just bought them. And I think it really was, PlayStation right now for the first time is at the roulette table, just putting money on red or black and hoping that it hits. And that seems to kind of be their strategy right now. And it feels that way also with Fair Games, the way it did with Concord. It feels like a very un-PlayStation-like type of release when you look at that game. And I don't, personally, right now, I don't think that game is going to do as bad as Concord. And the reason why is because it's a competitive heist shooter. And there really isn't that many of those out there. If you ask someone to name a heist shooter, I think a lot of people are going to name Payday, and they probably can't name another. I can't name another either, right? So you are entering into a genre that is not saturated, but I think that Concord will without a doubt have an effect on Fair Games. And it's actually going to have a positive effect. I don't think it's going to have a negative effect on it because now there are lessons for PlayStation to learn from this. And I think one lesson that they're going to learn is that I don't think that Fair Games is going to be PvE anymore. I think it's going to have a I don't think it's going to be PvP anymore. I think it's going to have a PvE component in it because they're seeing the success that Helldivers 2 is having. And I think that PvE is so far away from being saturated right now. And I think a game that mixes both, I think is a successful formula right now. I think that that's one change that we're going to see with Fair Games. And then finally, of course, we have Bungie working on Marathon, and then they're also working on a rumored MOBA that's codenamed Gummy Bears. So there's a lot of live service that they have going forward. Some fans have asked Sony to consider reviving older franchises like SOCOM, Killzone, or Resistance. I even sort of make a joke on my Twitter like, it's time to bring Killzone back. But I sort of said that half joking. I personally don't think, that the team at Guerrilla is interested in reviving Killzone. I think they're fine with moving forward. So I think you would have to find another team to build it. Number two, I just don't think it would work. I just honestly do not think it would work. I think it worked when it first came out, in the time that it came out. I don't think it would work now. SOCOM is another one that I think you run into the same issue where your biggest competitor is Call of Duty. And I think creating an army shooter right now, I just don't think is worth the investment. Resistance would definitely fail. I just don't see a path to success for an IP like that. I just personally don't think it's worth the investment. I think you're better off trying to come up with something original. Now, there is one IP that I was thinking about that might be worth considering and looking into. And this one might sound a bit out of left field, but that's Infamous. Infamous is a game that I think would be interesting to ponder about in terms of what does a live service Infamous look like. So a lot of people looked at Spider-Man: The Great Web and were like, okay, this sounds like a really cool concept, 4 different Spider-Men going into different multiverses, and it sort of be PvE. You have these big boss battles. But I think Infamous would actually be a really interesting concept too, in order to make a PvP slash PvE type of game in that world. Where imagine if you're able to create a hero, but it's a custom hero that you're building. You get to pick the powers, whether it's fire or smoke or whatever it is, neon, they've had previously in the Infamous games. And maybe you're interacting with one of the three protagonists from the games that they created. I think that's actually an IP that I would look into to maybe bring back and turn into live service. But I think overall PlayStation is going to be just fine. I think that people forget that live service is a gamble. It always and forever will be a gamble. I think single player is a little bit of a safer bet. And the reason why is because single player is pretty much one and done, right? You invest a game, hopefully you properly invest it. You're not going over budget. You're not ballooning the budget. Like Spider-Man 2 was definitely a balloon budget. I don't understand how that game came close to even almost $200 million. But so hopefully you stick within your budget. You create and release an incredible game. And obviously they just recently did it with Astro Bot. I mean, that's a game that probably couldn't have cost more than $50 million. And, you hopefully get a healthy return out of it. And it's a game that you don't have to continue investing into it. You're just investing into like maintenance over the years, right? Whereas live service, it's a machine, right? That you consistently, whatever your profits are, you have to pump 70% of those profits back into content for the game that has to keep living. So it doesn't matter what live service game you see. We talk a lot about success, but there has been a lot of failures for live service. And we're continuing to see failures every single day for live service. And I think a lot of people forget that I think PlayStation's mistake with their approach was, putting 7 darts in their hand and just tossing them, at the same time at a dartboard and hoping that one of them sticks. Like, hey, if we get one of these to stick, it'll be worth it. It'll be worth that $2 billion R&D investment. And I think whoever's been heading up live service at PlayStation, they probably need to find someone new. And I think they need to bring the same sort of ethics that they have in their single player division. They have to bring over a live service. There's definitely a quality issue with their live service plan at this point, where a lot of it, once again, is chasing trends. And a lot of it is just hoping that something sticks. Helldivers 2 being a really great example where I don't think anyone thought it was going to do as well as it did. And yes, it's not doing well right now, but I still think that Helldivers 2 is capable of a second wind. I think that it's built into the type of game that they have to be able to accomplish something like that. And we don't know what the PlayStation numbers are looking like. Who knows? PlayStation could still be pretty healthy, even if PC isn't. That's a game that I think could get a second wind with the right update, with the right stuff. I've been saying for a while that I do believe that the game is going to come to Xbox. I could absolutely see that happening. I know it sounds crazy. I know it sounds insane. But I guarantee you it's something that PlayStation is considering. I think that's something that could give that IP a second win. And yeah, I think a lot of people are looking at the failure that is Concord and somehow forgetting about the success that was Helldivers 2. And I think that obviously we can't look at Concord and say like, oh, this is like the greatest thing to happen to PlayStation. But there is a silver lining, and the silver lining is the lessons that will be learned, because people are forgetting that we're still very early into PlayStation's attempt to get into live service. And, you have to break a few eggs to make an omelet. I think that this is kind of sort of part of that breakage. It's a lot of money to lose, right? You're talking about $100 million investment. I personally do not see Concord coming back. I just don't see a scenario where you find success. Even if it comes back free to play, even if they go back to the drawing board and decide to redesign 70% of their hero roster, I just don't see a path to success for this game because it has a stink on it. There's a stench on this game that will now exist forever, that even if you were to re-release it, I think that stench remains. And even if you have great hero design, even if you make it free to play, you're still a hero shooter at the end of the day. And you still have to compete with Deadlocked, which is coming out soon, even though it's not a hero shooter, it's a MOBA. It's still gaining so much attention. You still have to compete with Overwatch, and you still have to compete with Marvel Rivals, which comes out later this year. I don't think that the game in its current form makes any sense. So what else does that mean? Then you have to rebuild the game. What's the point then? You might as well just build a different game then. So personally, I don't foresee Concord coming back, even though in their statement they sort of made it sound like, hey, we're taking a step back, we're going to evaluate this. I think that Sony would be dumb to re-release this game. I don't see a path to success for this game anymore, unfortunately. Hot releases for the week. September 9th, we have Warhammer 40k Space Marine 2. It did release last week in early access, but September 9th is the official release date. PC, PS5, Xbox Series X. We have Towerborn September 10th coming out to PC, Steam Early Access. I Am Your Beast is coming out also on PC. The Elder Scrolls Castles is coming to Android and iOS also September 10th. September 12th, we have Lollipop Chainsaw Repop, PC, PS5, Switch, Xbox Series X. And finally, Marvel vs. Capcom Fighting Collection Arcade Classics comes to PC, PS4, and Switch. Time for us to wrap it up. These are the stories that we didn't have time to get to. Enotria, the Last Song developers, claimed their game will be delayed on Xbox because they were stuck at the submission process after their announcement went viral. Microsoft reached out to apologize and rectify the issue. At this point, I think it's pretty safe to say that Xbox's third-party licensing division has probably seen a lot of layoffs. That's the only logical explanation for what's going on lately over there. They had that long-standing issue with Capcom, with a bunch of their games not coming over, issues that we've seen with Baldur's Gate, now even with Black Myth Wukong. There was another developer, I think it was a Chinese developer, that made it public how they were having issues getting their game on Xbox. Here's another publisher that felt that their only recourse was to go public because they couldn't get an answer back from Microsoft for something as simple as just getting through the submission process. Something is going very wrong over there at Xbox. And I think the simplest explanation is that their licensing division has suffered layoffs. And there's just not enough employees to go around and rectify a lot of these issues that they've been seeing. So it's good that these developers finally got an answer. Really bad. Looks really poor on you as a company that these guys had to go public and make this big stink in order to get you to reach back out. It's embarrassing. It's something that Phil Spencer and his team should be absolutely embarrassed about. And hopefully they put some systems in place so this doesn't happen again. During an interview at PAX West, Phil Spencer claims to have passed on Destiny and Guitar Hero when they were first pitched to him and his team. Guitar Hero, I'm going to be honest, I sort of get it. I understand that. Think about the absurdity of a team coming up to you and saying, we're going to make a music rhythm game, but in order to play it, you need to have a plastic guitar. It's a hard sell. And yes, Activision decided to go for it, and obviously the rest is history. I think Activision was the publisher of Guitar Hero. But that's not an easy pitch to get through. So that's one where Phil Spencer said he passed on it, where I think in hindsight it's very easy to say, wow, Phil Spencer, what a dummy. But I think at that moment in time, I think it's understandable why they would pass on it. That's a big risk, because it's not just a risk of the overhead cost of manufacturing, obviously building machines in order to create this one custom controller, the shipping costs, the storage costs. You know, you have to sort of make sure you have strong relationships with retailers, you know, for retailers to trust in this and carry this because it takes such a big footprint in stores. So it definitely was not an easy sell. So I understand that. Destiny is one that I can't understand that they passed on Destiny. Bungie showed you that that was a team ahead of their time. Like they showed it. They proved it to you with the first 3 Halos. They proved it that when this team has an idea, you need to listen. You need to trust them. So the fact that they declined publishing Destiny, which obviously, once again, was published by Activision. So kind of insane that they passed on these 2 games that eventually went to Activision. That to me is inexcusable from Phil Spencer. Now, so a lot of people are looking at this and saying, wow, Xbox has a lot of misses. A lot of people bring up Grand Theft Auto. For those who don't know, Xbox did pass on what eventually became Grand Theft Auto 3. They passed on being able to create a Marvel game, which eventually Spider-Man was created by PlayStation. I will say one thing, though, about this, because it's easy for people to say, like, wow, Xbox has passed on a lot of stuff. What a bunch of idiots. We don't know what PlayStation has passed on because they're not as open as Phil Spencer and Xbox has been. So, first of all, we have to commend Xbox because a lot of people don't talk about the failures. They only talk about their successes. So we have to give them their props for that. But the reason why we can't have these same conversations about PlayStation or maybe even Nintendo is because they don't share this information. So who knows? They probably could have passed on the same stuff that we don't know about. You know, like one thing that I know that has always kind of been said before was that PlayStation passed on Assassin's Creed, that Ubisoft went to them first to see if they could get like an exclusivity deal with PlayStation, and PlayStation passed on it. But I don't know how true that is. So every company has their misses. So I think it's easy for us to just kind of, what do you call it? Like ostracize Microsoft for passing on a bunch of these games and calling them a bunch of big dummies. But the only reason why people are able to do that is because Microsoft is the only one of these companies actually sharing these failures. Capcom announced that after technical discussions with Microsoft, Marvel's Capcom Fighting Collection and Capcom Fighting Collection 2 will release on Xbox One. I believe they said it's at some point next year, so don't expect it this year. As I said earlier, September 12th, those games are going to be playable on PC, PS4, and Switch. This is sort of a similar embarrassment as Inotrio, which is like great that you guys finally were able to make this work out. But why did it take this long? Why did it take for Capcom to announce publicly these games were coming out? Like, how is it that people at Xbox, your third-party licensing team, is not aware that Capcom is working on all these games and they're not coming to your system? That's a huge failure. That's something that you should have known about before, and you should have been working on immediately with Capcom to figure out what was going on. Is it a technical limitation? Are you guys worried about investing into technically making this work, and you're worried that the investment won't pay off? As Microsoft, you should have subsidized that payment then. You should have helped them with their costs. You should have lowered their royalty fee. Okay, instead of 30%, make it 20%. You should have worked some sort of deal with Capcom. These types of games, your system should not be missing them because these types of losses, they compound, right? So right now, when you think about if this generation, like why would you ever buy the next Xbox when you see how this generation is going with so many video games missing Xbox, with so many of these issues that Xbox is having? Why the hell would you choose Xbox Series Y over PlayStation 6 at this point? It's kind of a simple choice, right? And finally, Rockstar Games reportedly offered an artist named Martin Ware, a member of a band called Heaven 17, just $7,500 to use one of their tracks for Grand Theft Auto 6. This reportedly included a buyout of any future royalties from the game forever. Now, apparently this is a huge band. Apparently they were huge in the 80s. I'm going to be honest, I've never heard of them, but I'm a hip-hop head, so of course I wouldn't have heard about this band. I think this is one of those issues where two things can be true simultaneously. And I hate social media because they make you believe that two things can't be true at the same time. So number one, it's true that $7,500 is too low. Now, according to some replies that this person had made on Twitter, it was $7,500 for each of the three writers. So it's not $7,500 to be split amongst everyone. But even if it's $7,500 each writer, that's still pretty low for a game that, let's be honest, Grand Theft Auto 6 is going to make over $1 billion within the first 24 hours. There's zero doubt about that. I can say that with the utmost confidence. They're going to make $1 billion in the first 24 hours, right? So it's understandable why a band would say, this is way too low, especially if you're trying to buy out all future royalties, right? It's also true that there's a lot of exposure to be had by putting your song in Grand Theft Auto. A lot of exposure here, all right? So I think it's one of those things that's understandable on multiple levels. Personally, I think they should have taken it. I'm going to be honest. I think they still should have taken it because the problem is that Rockstar is like, it's like they're suffering from success. If you say no, there's thousands of artists waiting that are going to say yes. So if you say no, they have no incentive to renegotiate with you. It really is. Rockstar is in a position and Take-Two is in a position where it's really take it or leave it. And you got to respect it. They've been able to build this. That's where they are. If they don't want to pay that more than that, they don't have to. I look at it very similar to the Super Bowl, where artists do not get paid to appear at the Super Bowl. Honestly, a lot of artists actually lose money initially. They invest their own money into the Super Bowl. But the return that they get is their album sales and their ticket sales usually explode after the Super Bowl. The exposure is just so high for them. I look at this almost the same. It's like the gaming Super Bowl, I guess, in terms of exposure. Shout out to the week. Shout outs go to Rocksteady and Ballistic Moon. Both teams announced job cuts last week, so hopefully those men and women find something very, very soon. And finally, shout out to Capcom. Street Fighter 6 has sold over 4 million copies. Pretty amazing. Make sure you guys subscribe to Camp Koji on your favorite podcast platform so you can listen to it on the go. If you already are, please leave us a review. It helps out more than you know it. Thank you guys so much for joining me. Please follow us on Twitter and YouTube at Camp Koji for future updates. Once again, my name is Joel, and I will see you all next week.